I want to give you a little bit of introduction to the church history class this coming semester. It starts pretty soon, but just want to give you some things to give you a bit of expectation for what we're going to do. So this is the second half of church history. We'll be looking at from the Reformation to modern times. Of course, modern times is a little bit rough, maybe modern within the last generation or so. We won't really get up to present day. That's kind of difficult to actually do. There's so much here in this time period to cover. Let me talk a little bit how this class, I structure it differently than the first half of church history. So if you've been in the first half of church history, which you don't have to have had, and don't feel like you're really at a disadvantage if you haven't been in the first half before you take the second half. You can do either one. But if you have been in the first half, let me tell you a little bit about some of the differences for the second half. Well, first of all, one thing that's the same, we're going to start off with the same lecture. We're going to have a lecture on the nature of history, which is going to be very similar to the lecture you heard at the very beginning of the last class. Do come for it, because I know that I benefit by just reviewing the material to teach each time, and I've taught it a number of times now. So I think this is important just to remind ourselves what we're doing when we're doing history. I think we take that for granted. We're not self-conscious about what historical study is, and then we miss things, and we don't realize the full impact of what we're actually doing. So we'll start off with the lecture just about the nature of history, and then a little bit about the Reformation. We'll have that in there, perhaps, or maybe that'll just be an online thing I put up. So that'll be the first week. After that, we're going to spend some time in the Reformation. Now here's where this class is going to differ than the last class. We are not going to go in chronological order. It's a bit odd for history class, but there's just so much here to look at. And I want to tell history as one story, right? The history is the narrative unfolding of events where it's not just names and dates. It is this story. It unfolds. There's a plot. Things happen. And then that causes something else to happen. And then people respond to that. And there's unforeseen consequences. And there's new horizons, new opportunities, new dangers for the church and the people of God. So yes, we're going to look at a story, and it just becomes too unwieldy to try to explain all of it, because the church ends up going off in so many different areas, and we can't do all of them. And there's so many things in church history during this time that we're just going to have to largely neglect, and I feel bad about that. But instead, we're going to target some certain areas and explore them a little bit more in depth, so that you get a sense of what they're about. And not only is this going to teach you about what happened, but this is also going to teach you how to do historical inquiry, so that if the period of history and the place of history that you are most interested is not one that we cover, which is, unless we happen to hit on the few things that you're interested in, that's probably going to be the case. What I want to do then is to equip you with the tools that you need in order to study that on your own. So by going in depth in certain areas, I am trying to give you the tools and resources that you need to go in depth in whatever area that you want. And not to say that means that I'm not only speaking to those people who might want to go on and get a PhD in history. I'm speaking to everybody, because as you are interested in certain areas, I want to give you resources and tools that you can go back and do this historical study for yourself. Namely, that means helping you understand how to read primary texts and how to understand the unfolding of events. And anybody can do this, and you're going to be able to do this as you sort of see what we do and practice it in this class. You'll be able to go off and do likewise, I believe. So that's my rationale for being less comprehensive than you might expect, is to focus on certain areas more in depth. And therefore, we're not going chronologically. We're looking at specific areas. We're going to start off with the Reformation, looking at Europe. We're going to look at the Protestant Reformation, how that began with Martin Luther. We're going to spend some time with Calvin and the English Reformers and the Continental Reformers. We're going to spend a few weeks looking at that, because I think the Protestant Reformation is very helpful in clarifying what the gospel is. And as Christians, we are constantly needing to clarify the gospel. for ourselves and for our churches and for the world at large. No, this is how you get right with God, not this way. It is this way, not this way, because God in His Word has revealed that. And the Protestant Reformation is just a wonderful thing to study, to see how the church clarified how it is that we get right with God. I think this helps us just in our own spiritual life, but also helps us to be better counselors and preachers and teachers and friends and church members as we just walk through these things. So we want to look at the Protestant Reformation because that's a thing to have in our minds that I think would be very important. We're going to then skip over centuries, really, and then we're going to look a little bit at another period of history that's fascinating to me, also in Europe, and although it does bleed over into America, is the rise of liberalism tied with Nazi Germany. So I think sometimes when there's circles where we look at the rise of liberalism, theological liberalism, as being a bad thing, and certainly there are very many negative consequences to it. But we sort of look at it only as if it's the ideas, and we don't look at them as they are located and grounded in actual history. And World War II and the rise of Nazism shaped so much in terms of intellectual history that then bleeds over into the actual lived out philosophies of many people, both in the church and the world. So, connecting the dots between, for instance, what Karl Barth was saying and his response to World War I, and then even more World War II, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, these are people who are responding to some of the most horrendous evil that is so acutely pressed upon people, and it's helpful to see how that is a theological crisis. So we're going to look a little bit about that. One of the papers, I think probably my favorite paper I ever did for one of my classes was a Christian response to the Holocaust, and that what I studied there has always stuck with me. And we're not going to do that per se. Although I'm happy to talk some about that, but it will revolve around those similar ideas. So I think that's important for us to study. And then the third major area wow, that wasn't an earthquake? My phone just fell. Okay, now we're all back together again. The third major area that we're going to look at is the history of the Black church in America. And that is an area that I really appreciate studying because it is a beautiful story, a sad story in many ways, another instance of oppression, sadly this time by people who were explicitly claiming to believe the gospel. And that's just sad and tragic for a number of reasons. So we're going to look at just how the Black church arose and how it was in a response to slavery and racism and all that. This is something that I'm not like an expert in, having done my doctoral work or graduate work in that area, but I've been trying to read about it and get an education in it, and I'll share with you what I'm learning and reading. Will depend somewhat on guest speakers here, so I'll have a couple people lined up who have more expertise in this area than I do, and we'll learn together from them. But for that last part, the history of the Black church in America, the readings will be, we'll do Frederick Douglass's part of his narrative of slavery, particularly as he talks about the Christianity of the slaveholder. So I'm kind of interested in that. And I think that's just wonderful to read, sobering to read, that people can be so inconsistent. After that, we're going to use Thabiti Anawile's book, Faithful Preachers. I like Thabiti. Always appreciate hearing him preach, great preacher. But I haven't assigned that book because of Thabiti. I've assigned that book because he brings together a collection of primary source documents of people that I think are really important to read. So you can read the introductions that Thabiti writes on your own if you want. I'd encourage you to. But for this class, you're going to read not part 1, but parts 2 and 3, various readings out of that. So please get a hold of the Faithful Preacher's book. You don't need to have that at the very beginning, but you will need to have it because we will use that book as we work through the end part. So you can wait a little while if you want, but you need to get it at the end. The library does have 2 copies, neither of which you can check out because they want to have the textbooks in there for people to read, but you're free to just come and read them here in the library if you want. So, well, that's a little bit about what we're going to do. For those of you who've had me before, well, that's how this class is going to be different from Church History 1. But if you're new to this class, be aware that what's going to happen is every week you're going to have 2 assignments. They're each 1 page long of writing that you have to do. You have to write out a summary of the class lecture. And the class lecture is the part of history that I'm actually telling, not the primary source documents that we go over. The other thing that you have to do every week is write a 1-page summary of the primary source document that I give you. And in terms of what is more important for your grade, the primary source summary is far more important than the 1-page summary of the lecture. The 1-page summary of the lecture is just a way for you to rethink through some of these things that we talked about, put it on paper, drive it deeper into your brain, help you remember it for later on. The 1-page summary of the primary source document is where I really want you to spend the bulk of your time. Just do those 1-page summaries of the class lecture very quickly. Put periods in there in appropriate places, but really don't worry about grammar, spelling, any more than just that I can be able to actually read it. I want you to spend more time on your primary source summary where you will read over the document once, maybe twice, and then try to say, okay, what is the author saying in fewer words? You're going to take a 20-page document, 30-page document, 40-page document, however long it is, and reduce it down to 1 page. What's the essence of this argument reduced down to 1 page? I don't really want you to go over a page. I don't want you to go under a page either. I want you to aim right for a page to take that larger material and condense it down. It's a rather advanced skill because it requires you thinking through and evaluating what the author says and not getting the tangential points, not getting the subpoints, but getting the main points and then getting those down as best you can. So those are the assignments. It's really important that you stay caught up, you stay current. I will take 2 of the primary source documents late. No questions asked. If you're sick or you just don't get it in, that's fine. Turn in 2 late. I don't want to take more than that late because I want to force you to do these each week and do these within the context of the historical topics that we're talking about. That's the point. The primary source readings correspond to the time in history that we're talking about, and I want you to kind of be doing those things together. I will try, no promises, but I'm going to try to do a video introduction to each of the primary source documents. That's part of the extra information that we need to put online because this is a blended class. So you will be able to then watch my introduction to the primary source document and then do the reading of that document yourself and then do the 1-page summary. So this class does not have big projects. Okay, I'm not asking you to turn in a paper. I'm not asking you to cram for a test. The final exam is going to be just you giving a narrative summary of what we looked at through the whole semester, which is not something you need to really cram for. It's just going to be what you're going to be able to do if you've paid attention and thought through the material as we've gone on. This class doesn't have major things that you have to study for or major projects. What it has instead is just 2 things you'll turn in every week as the class goes on, and just you try to be faithful in doing that. Moderate amount of work every week. You'll be successful in the class, and I think you'll have learned a lot as you go on. So what I'd love for you to come out of this class with is just a greater sense of connection to people who've lived before us, that you understand them in their context, and you appreciate them, understanding their strengths and their weaknesses. You get a sense that God has preserved and protected the church through many, many trials, toils, and snares, and He will continue to do that. So, as you look at the church and realize how messed up they were before, and how broken they were, and how many trials and things were assaulting them before, I think it'll give you confidence. Yeah, this is a work of God, and He will keep it going. But that doesn't give us an excuse to just kind of sit back and be like, oh, well, who cares what I do? I can oppose the church even, and it'll continue. No. We look at those who have been faithful and who have worked very hard for the sake of the clarity of the gospel and faithfulness to God and the purity of the church, and we want to be like them. We want to see heroes in here. Yes, not perfect heroes, but people whose lives are worthy of imitation. And then we want to go and live likewise. So that's what I come away with every time I teach through the church history material, and I pray that you will come away with that as well. Well, I look forward to seeing you as soon as the class starts next week.